serial number, and stood alone in Congress to name the unthinkable. Menendez called it a witch hunt. But what Jasmine said next turned the entire nation upside down. So what exactly did Jasmine Crockett say that left Congress speechless and America on fire? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The rain hadn't started yet, but the air in Washington was heavy, like the sky was holding its breath. Jasmine Crockett sat at her desk long after most of Capitol Hill had emptied out, reviewing appropriations data while a cold cup of coffee sweated beside her laptop. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then picked up. No greeting, just static. Then, clear and deliberate, a voice rasped three words. Gold. Egypt Menendez. Click. Silence. Her fingers tightened around the phone. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. She didn't know who had called, but in that moment, she knew two things for certain. One, someone was scared enough to speak in code, and two, the rot in this city had just knocked on her door. At that very moment, while the warning still echoed in her ears, across town, the man at the center of it all was smiling for the cameras. Senator Bob Menendez stood at the podium, his voice syrupy smooth, calling for strengthened cooperation between the U.S. and Egypt. Cameras clicked like machine guns while his eyes sparkled with rehearsed sincerity. Behind him, an LED screen read, "Regional stability through shared values," a perfect slogan for laundering betrayal. Jasmine watched from her office, fists clenched, lips pressed so tightly they drew blood. He spoke of peace, but she saw profit. He promised partnership, but she saw purchased influence. And worst of all, the media lapped it up. No one asked why an arms deal passed without vote. No one questioned why the only man who benefited was standing under a spotlight made of gold dust and lies. The email had no subject line, no signature, just a photo attachment, grainy, time-stamped, and taken from a low angle like someone was hiding. Jasmine clicked. What she saw made her breath stop cold. It was a shot of a closet interior, dimly lit, cluttered, and in the center hung a tailored navy blue jacket. Stuffed into the inside pocket, as casually as loose receipts, were wads of $100 bills and something else. A gold bar, half slid into a silk lining, the kind with a serial number engraved on the edge. Jasmine zoomed in. The digits were clear, traceable, official. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't some internet rumor or abstract suspicion. It was visual proof, physical, damning, and horrifying in its carelessness. Menendez hadn't even tried to hide it well. Power, she realized, had made him sloppy, and worse, the timestamp told her exactly when the photo was taken. During a supposed family-only weekend, when the senator had claimed he was out of town. Someone close to him had leaked this. Someone inside his circle. That meant two things. There were cracks forming in his empire, and she wasn't the only one watching. But Jasmine also knew what this meant for her. If this photo got out, the media wouldn't dig deeper. They'd sensationalize it, then bury it beneath noise. If she used it, she had to do it with precision, like a surgeon with a scalpel, not a hammer. Because this wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt man. It was about exposing the system that protected him. And once you pierced that veil, the system struck back. She had the image, the serial number, and the sickening truth. But Jasmine knew that without a money trail, a photo was just a whisper in a hurricane. So she got to work, not with headlines, but with silence. Jasmine pulled in only 3 aides, people she trusted like family, and swore them to absolute secrecy. They operated from a private conference room 2 floors beneath the Capitol, no windows, phones locked outside. Night after night, they pored over banking disclosures, campaign donations, import records, and wire transfer data buried beneath layers of shell companies. It wasn't flashy, but it was forensic. And soon the outlines of something monstrous began to take shape. A consulting firm in New Jersey had received over $2.7 million in under 2 years. None of it declared, none of it taxed. That firm shared a mailing address with a campaign donor of Menendez's and its managing partner, a cousin-in-law with no prior business experience and a history of debt. But the real twist came when one aide cracked into shipping data from the port of Newark. Hidden within cargo labeled as educational materials were shipments from Alexandria, Egypt. The sender was a logistics firm tied to Egyptian military contracts. Jasmine stared at the wall, where red string connected photos, names, shell companies, and account numbers. It looked like fiction, but every line was real. This wasn't just about bribes. This was about foreign money bleeding into American policy, manipulated votes, and favors exchanged for gold. She felt sick, not from the scope of the corruption, but from the realization that no one else was looking. No federal agent, no journalist, no watchdog committee. It was just her, a few loyal staffers, and a mountain of truth everyone else had learned to ignore. She leaned over the table and whispered, more to herself than anyone else. They built this house on blood money, and I swear, I'll be the one to burn it down. Just as Jasmine was preparing to make her findings public, every file double-checked, every bank record annotated, every thread ready to be pulled, Bob Menendez stepped onto a stage and flipped the narrative before she could speak a word. It wasn't a courtroom. It was a press conference wrapped in the illusion of truth and patriotism. Cameras surrounded him like armor. The room was filled with carefully selected reporters, pre-cleared aides, and a handful of political allies who still owed him favors. He adjusted his blue tie, straightened his spine, and gave the people a performance they would never forget. This entire ordeal, he began, pausing with just the right amount of gravity, is nothing more than a politically motivated smear campaign. His tone was smooth, calm, even warm, as if he were comforting the public from a lie someone else told. There are individuals in this government who fear strength, who fear real leadership, and when they cannot beat you at the ballot box, they try to bury you with baseless accusations. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. And that was the most dangerous part. He looked like he believed every word. Let me be perfectly clear. I have never accepted a bribe. I have never sold my influence. What you are witnessing is the weaponization of politics by those who can't control me. Then came the final blow. This gold bar nonsense? A joke. A desperate headline. He held up a folder, waved it in the air like a prop. No charges, no proof, just noise. Reporters scribbled, but no one challenged him. No one asked how $480,000 in cash ended up stuffed into his jackets. No one dared question why an unregistered shell company in New Jersey had ties to Egyptian defense contractors and his own extended family. And why would they? Menendez had been here before. He knew how to flood the room with certainty just long enough to drown the truth. Jasmine watched from her office, standing alone, hands locked behind her back like she was holding herself together. The screen showed him walking off stage, waving like a man just declared innocent by God himself. Her chest burned, not from anger, but from something colder. Recognition. She'd seen this play before. Powerful men slipping out of scandal by wearing patriotism like a bulletproof vest. She wanted to scream, but instead she stared at her reflection in the window. Stone-faced, silent, still. No cameras pointed at her, no cheering aides, no microphones. Just the truth, gathering like a storm inside her. And in that silence, she made a quiet vow. You think you ended this, Senator. But I haven't even started. But while Menendez tried to bury the truth beneath press clips and polished lies, Jasmine wasn't waiting for permission. She was waiting for the right moment, and now it had come. It was a Wednesday morning hearing on the federal budget, meant to be routine, procedural, forgettable. Most lawmakers showed up out of obligation, not curiosity. Staffers moved quietly along the walls, half listening while updating spreadsheets or drafting press releases. Menendez sat comfortably near the center of the semicircle, dressed sharp as always, leaning back like a man in control of the room. His hands rested lightly on the table, his smile faint but smug. He looked like someone who'd weathered a scandal and come out untouched again. And for a moment, it seemed like he had won, until Jasmine spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, tapped her microphone once, and looked directly at Menendez with eyes that didn't blink. Senator, she said slowly, letting the word hang in the air like a judgment, have you ever considered that justice has a memory? The words dropped into the room like a hammer wrapped in velvet. The hum of side conversations stopped. Pages froze mid-turn. A few heads turned in her direction, not yet sure where she was going, but aware now that something had shifted. Jasmine didn't waver. Because justice doesn't forget who approved the deals. Justice doesn't forget who signed off on millions. And it sure as hell doesn't forget who stuffed cash into a coat pocket and walked away like it was nothing. Menendez's lips curled into a polite smile, a reflex, a shield, but he didn't interrupt. His eyes narrowed slightly, like a man calculating whether to fight back now or later. Jasmine kept going, her tone calm but tightening with every sentence, like a vice closing around a lie. You see, I've gone through the records, the wires, the shell companies. And funny thing, when I looked at where the money from Egypt ended up, the paper trail didn't vanish. It circled right back here, right back to New Jersey, right back to people connected to you. Someone across the room coughed, an accidental sound that suddenly felt too loud. A few senators shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Jasmine paused for a long moment, then leaned in even closer to the mic, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. We sit here talking about defense budgets and foreign aid like it's abstract math, but there are real people who believe in this government. And every time we let someone turn a public office into a private bank account, we don't just lose trust, we lose the soul of the system. The room went still again, this time in a deeper way. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition. Jasmine had named what others had only dared to whisper. Menendez adjusted his collar slightly, nodded once like he was pretending to take her words seriously, but his eyes told a different story. Irritation, calculation, maybe even fear. He knew what she had just done. In just a few sentences, she had taken years of his quiet deals, his clever laundering, his whispered arrangements, and dragged them into the light. No theatrics, no accusations, just truth, lined up like dominoes. And now, for the first time, it wasn't just Jasmine who saw him differently. It was the whole room. But the hearing was only the beginning, because sometimes justice doesn't shout in courtrooms. Sometimes it slips a sealed folder across a table in the dead of night. Jasmine had just wrapped a late meeting when the message came. One contact. No names. 10 minutes. Corner booth. 5th and F Street. She didn't bring staff. She didn't tell security. She left her phone behind and walked into the night with only instinct as her armor. The cafe was mostly empty, dimly lit, with a humming espresso machine and jazz music playing too softly to matter. She sat down without ordering. She didn't need to. She wasn't here for coffee. She was here for truth, raw, unfiltered, and dangerous. A man slid into the booth across from her. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days, who'd been carrying something far heavier than a file. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He didn't say her name. Instead, with a hand that trembled just enough to be noticeable, he placed a thin manila folder on the table. You didn't get this from me, he muttered, eyes darting once toward the door. And I was never here. Then without another word, he stood and disappeared into the rain-slicked night like a shadow that never belonged to daylight. Jasmine didn't move for several seconds. Her fingertips rested on the folder like she was feeling the temperature of a weapon. Then slowly, carefully, she opened it. Inside were 3 photographs, blurry but clear enough to make her stomach twist. A coat closet, a navy suit jacket, and inside the jacket pocket, nestled beside crisp stacks of cash, was a gold bar. Real, heavy, identifiable. She leaned in. Her breath hitched as she saw it. The tiny row of digits etched into the surface. A serial number. Cold. Unmistakable. One page beneath the photo showed a corresponding entry in a Cairo-based bank. This wasn't internet speculation. It wasn't gossip. It was a direct connection between an Egyptian state asset and a private U.S. citizen, via a shell company in New Jersey linked to Menendez's wife's name. She flipped through the rest in silence. A notarized export record from Alexandria marked the gold as part of Egypt's military reserve. A second document showed it had been lost in transit 3 months prior. But the final image said everything. A time-stamped shot from inside Menendez's own townhouse, showing the same bar, same serial number, in his personal storage space. Jasmine stared at the page as if it were speaking to her. And in a way it was. This wasn't just evidence. It was a rupture. A breach so brazen, so arrogant, it reeked of a man who truly believed he'd never get caught. And for years he hadn't. She sat back, exhaled slowly and shut the folder. No one in the cafe noticed the weight of what she held. To them, she was just another woman drinking nothing, thinking hard. But inside, she was already calculating. She couldn't go public yet. Not with this. Not before it was bulletproof. One leak, one misstep, and the story would be framed as revenge, not justice. And she knew how the game worked. Truth didn't matter unless it landed like a hammer. She tucked the folder into her coat and stood, her face calm, unreadable, but her eyes burned with resolve. She didn't have time to feel fear. Not now. She had something far more powerful. She had proof. And soon the world would have it too, when she decided it was time. But while Jasmine guarded the truth like a weapon, somewhere behind locked doors, Menendez was already planning how to bury it, using power not to defend innocence, but to silence it. The meeting was not announced. It wasn't on any calendar, not even the private ones. It happened behind a closed door in a hotel suite on the top floor of a building where everything smelled like wealth and impunity. The kind of place where handshakes replaced subpoenas and loyalty was measured in silence. 8 men entered that room, donors, strategists, political veterans, all people who had built their careers near Menendez or because of him. They didn't come for lunch. They came for protection. Not of the party, not of the people, but of themselves. Menendez didn't waste time with pleasantries. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and got straight to it. "They want a scalp," he said, voice low but charged, "and they think it's gonna be mine." No one responded. He stood at the head of the table like a general before a retreat. "Let me be clear," he continued, pacing slowly. "If I go down, it won't be quiet. There are documents, emails, calls. I don't even need to lie. I just need to remind people who signed off on what and when." The air in the room thickened. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "You all remember 2019? The Dubai contracts? The shipment delays?" A man across the table shifted uncomfortably. Menendez noticed. He smiled, cold and thin. Exactly. What Menendez didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that one of those men had reached his breaking point. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was conscience. Maybe it was the simple realization that this time, the dam was going to break no matter what. Hidden inside his blazer was a recording device no bigger than a quarter, stitched into the inner lining of the breast pocket. The mic caught everything, the tension, the veiled threats, the explicit strategy. For 42 minutes, the voices in that room mapped out a plan to stall investigations, flood the media with distractions, float legal smears against Jasmine Crockett, and pressure key members of Congress to stay silent. It wasn't a discussion. It was a blueprint for cover-up. 2 days later, a plain manila envelope was slipped under Jasmine's office door. No postage, no fingerprints, no return address. Inside was a single black thumb drive and a yellow sticky note with 3 handwritten words. Listen carefully. Share nothing. Jasmine sat alone at her desk, closed the blinds, locked the door, and plugged the drive into a secure laptop. She wore headphones, not because she needed privacy, but because she needed to hear every word without interruption. As the audio played, her face didn't move. Her breath stayed even, but her knuckles turned white where she gripped the arms of her chair. There was no room for misinterpretation. Menendez wasn't just trying to outlast a scandal. He was orchestrating a survival campaign designed to destroy anyone who stood in his way, including her. "Crockett's dangerous," one voice said. "She's clean, she's smart, and she's loud." Another voice followed. "Then we make her less clean, or less loud." Everyone has a pressure point. Jasmine paused the recording at that line. Her stomach tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't politics. This was a threat, a plan, and it wasn't coming from some fringe extremist. It was coming from within the walls of power. She pressed play again and let the recording run until the end. Then she removed the headphones, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the ceiling for a long, silent minute. No one else knew yet. Not her staff, not the press, not the public. But she knew, and the weight of it sat heavy on her chest. Not because she was afraid to act, but because she understood exactly what it would cost to do it right. If she exposed the tape now, they'd cry entrapment, political warfare. She'd be accused of setting them up. The spin machine would kick in within hours. But if she waited, just long enough to verify the voices, tie it to the evidence she already had, this tape wouldn't just reveal corruption. It would prove conspiracy. It would show intent, strategy, guilt. She slid the thumb drive into a locked drawer and stood up. Her reflection in the dark window looked sharper than before. Tired, yes, but clearer, more certain. She wasn't just in a fight now. She was in a war, and the difference between surviving and winning would come down to one thing: timing. But Jasmine knew there would come a moment when silence was no longer strength, when the truth had to walk through fire, straight into the heart of power, and say its name out loud. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, every camera live, every breath held. On that day, the floor of the house wasn't just a stage. It was a battlefield. Jasmine stood alone at the center, holding a stack of documents with hands that didn't shake. She wasn't here to accuse. She was here to unmask. "Mr. Speaker," she began, voice steady and echoing across the marble, "I rise not for partisan gain, not for vengeance, but because the weight of this silence is now heavier than the cost of truth." She took one step forward and unfolded the first page. Account number 611-034-2, registered under a holding company in Newark, received 4 wire transfers from a Cairo-based bank: $82,000, $143,000, $117,500, and $230,000. The chamber stirred. Some looked confused. Others sat perfectly still. Jasmine didn't pause. She turned the page. "Each transfer," she continued, "corresponds to a U.S. Senate vote or committee recommendation directly benefiting the Egyptian Ministry of Defense." Her words were clear, surgical, inescapable. "These are not accusations. These are facts. And now, let me be absolutely specific." She reached into a folder and pulled out a photograph, projected onto the chamber's central monitor. "This gold bar," she said, pointing at the screen, "was found in a private closet linked to Senator Robert Menendez. Serial number 96KHE001, matched to a shipment logged as missing by the Central Bank of Egypt 3 months prior." Audible gasps rippled through the room. Menendez stared straight ahead, frozen. Jasmine pressed on. The bar was photographed beside cash bundles totaling over $480,000. The cash was wrapped in restaurant takeout bags. "This isn't fiction. This is the rot beneath our robes." She stepped forward once more, lowering the last page slowly, her voice now lower, but heavier. "A man may sell his conscience for gold. He may buy silence. He may even buy time. But history—" She paused, looking around the room, locking eyes with every trembling face. "History buys it all back, with the blood of justice." The chamber was dead still, not a cough, not a whisper, just the ringing echo of one woman's voice, cutting through the walls of a government that had forgotten what truth sounded like. The silence that followed Jasmine's final words was short-lived, because once truth is named in the House of Power, it doesn't whisper anymore. It roars across a nation. By nightfall, the images were everywhere. The gold bar, serial number clearly visible, timestamp in the corner, was plastered across every screen in America. CNN ran the headline in bold red: "The gold in the closet, Senator under fire." MSNBC looped the clip of Jasmine's speech on repeat, anchoring every hour with analysis. Even Fox News, usually cautious with coverage of Democratic corruption, splashed it across their screen with an unmistakable tinge of glee. "Golden scandal, Dem senator exposed." Social media turned the story into a wildfire. Hashtags exploded within minutes. # Menendez Gold, # Not My Senator, # Golden Gate. Influencers, journalists, retired prosecutors, Everyone had an opinion, but no one could deny what was now in plain sight. Gold in a pocket, cash in a closet, and a senator who no longer looked untouchable. The photo of the serial number, zoomed in, crisp, damning, became the symbol of everything rotten in Washington. By the next morning, the streets of Newark, Trenton, and Jersey City were filled. Hundreds, then thousands of people marched with hand-painted signs. Some read, "Justice is priceless." Others, "Bought and paid for." But the one that echoed loudest, the one chanted from sidewalks and plastered on overpasses, was simple and direct. "Not my senator." They chanted it outside his offices. They shouted it on the courthouse steps. Students, veterans, nurses, small business owners, all saying what the cameras had only implied. This wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal, and it was personal. Jasmine had lit the match. The public poured on the gasoline. Local news helicopters hovered above the protests. National outlets set up satellite trucks to broadcast live. Menendez's suburban home was surrounded by reporters day and night. Cameras pointed at every window, every curtain twitch. Political allies began to distance themselves, their statements suddenly vague, their loyalty visibly thinning. A senior senator canceled a scheduled joint appearance. A committee chair postponed indefinitely, a defense hearing Menendez was supposed to lead. Behind the scenes, campaign donors began pulling out, quietly but with urgency. Lobbyists, always sniffing the wind, shifted their weight away from the man who had once been a power broker. The same power now made him radioactive. And yet Menendez did not flinch, at least not in public. He held a brief press conference on the steps of a municipal building. His voice was steady, his expression defiant. "I have served this country honorably for decades," he said. "I will not resign over unproven allegations in political theater." He claimed the evidence was circumstantial, the photographs taken out of context, and the money legally acquired. The gold, he insisted, was a personal investment, a phrase that made even the reporters glance sideways. But it wasn't his words that caught attention. It was his eyes. The bravado was rehearsed, like a play he had performed before. But the eyes, they were different. They darted. They blinked too much. They avoided the cameras when Jasmine's name came up. For the first time since the scandal broke, there was something new in his stare. Fear. Fear not of prosecution. He had survived investigations before. Not even of political ruin. He believed he could outspin the press. But fear of the public. Fear of the voters. Fear of the shift he could feel but not stop. Because this time, the outrage wasn't a headline. It was a movement. This wasn't cable news noise. This was door-to-door anger, neighborhood fury. A breach in the trust he had quietly drained for years finally snapped. His team scrambled behind the scenes. PR consultants were brought in. Crisis lawyers reviewed every word in his statement. But none of it mattered. The story had grown larger than him. It wasn't about just one senator anymore. It was about a question echoing in every living room in America. How many more are hiding gold in their closets? Inside his private residence, Menendez paced. The lights were off, the blinds closed. His phone buzzed constantly, calls he ignored. He poured a drink, sat at the edge of a chair, and stared at the muted television. Jasmine was on screen again, not shouting, not gloating, just speaking, calm, sharp, controlled. "We are not here to destroy careers," she said. "We are here to restore faith." He clenched the glass tighter. The ice clinked against the rim. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. He had thought she'd flinch, fold, fade. But she didn't. She sharpened. She struck. And now he was bleeding in places no camera could see. The polling data came in that afternoon. His approval rating had dropped by 17 points in 3 days. Calls from Democratic leaders, once warm and routine, now ended with cold phrases like, "We'll circle back," or "Let's give this time." Jasmine, meanwhile, was trending nationwide. Requests for interviews flooded her office. Editorials praised her clarity. And in New Jersey, her name, once distant to many voters, was now spoken with a new kind of reverence. People didn't just hear her, they believed her. She had done what most thought impossible, stood on the House floor, and held up a mirror that Washington had long avoided. Meanwhile, Menendez's legal team began preparing for what they called worst-case scenarios. Subpoenas loomed. Federal prosecutors requested interviews. Bank records were re-examined. The gold bar, now in FBI custody, had already been matched, twice over, to shipments missing from an Egyptian state inventory. Every line Menendez had used publicly now read like misdirection. Every excuse sounded thinner. And as the sun set on another day of protests, another cycle of coverage, another internal campaign collapse, he finally sat down, stared at a blank wall, and whispered, "They're coming." Not to anyone in particular, not out loud enough to seem panicked, but just enough for his aides nearby to look up and say nothing. Across the river, Jasmine stood alone in her office, looking out over a city that suddenly felt a little more honest. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment to exhale. The machine hadn't stopped, but it had cracked. And through that crack, truth had gotten in. Not because it shouted, but because someone finally refused to be silent. But as the protests swelled and headlines refused to die, the walls began to close, not just around Menendez, but around a party now forced to choose between loyalty and legitimacy. Behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, pressure was mounting like a rising tide against a dam already cracking. The Democratic caucus had met 3 times in 48 hours, every conversation louder, tenser, more fractured than the last. Senior members whispered about optics, junior members begged for a unified message, and party leadership was drowning in emails from donors, grassroots organizers, and voters who all wanted the same thing: accountability. It wasn't just about Menendez anymore. It was about what his defiance said about them, about whether their silence would become complicity, about whether the party that promised to clean up Washington would now defend a man found neck-deep in luxury cash, gold bars, and foreign money. Whispers of expulsion started circling. Committee assignments were quietly threatened. Staffers began to jump ship. But Menendez, true to his nature, didn't flinch. He held a press conference on the Capitol lawn, wearing his usual pinstripe suit, a crimson tie, and an expression carefully engineered to look wounded but strong. "This," he began, his voice slow and heavy, "is not justice. This is a smear campaign, a witch hunt." He paused to let the words settle, then raised his voice just enough. "I have fought for this country for decades. And now, because of political jealousy, because I speak truth about international affairs, I am being targeted. By my own." He looked straight into the cameras. "I will not resign. I will not be pushed out. Because I am not guilty, and because we no longer punish people based on rumor and spectacle." It was a speech built for sound bites, sculpted for defiance. But it wasn't working like it used to. This time, the performance felt like an echo from a script America had grown tired of. That same afternoon, Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the press riser just outside the Capitol steps. No entourage, no teleprompter. Just a worn leather folder in her hand and the full weight of conviction behind her eyes. Reporters surged forward, microphones tilted in her direction. She didn't wait for questions. She looked straight ahead and said calmly, but with unmistakable force, "No one is hunting witches." The cameras froze. She held the pause for just long enough, then added, "We're not chasing shadows or spinning tales. We are following facts. We are reading receipts. We are asking why a public servant had $500,000 in cash hidden inside takeout bags in his closet, and why a gold bar with a serial number tied to a foreign government ended up in his jacket pocket." Her voice didn't rise, but her words hit like a hammer. She continued, her tone steady, like a scalpel cutting through years of excuses. "When people in power get caught, they don't confess. They cry victim. They call it politics. They try to turn exposure into persecution. But this is not a political attack. This is a moral one. And if it makes some uncomfortable good, it means it's working." Reporters shifted. Pens scribbled. Even the ones who had doubted her before now leaned in. Jasmine closed the folder in her hands slowly, deliberately. "Senator Menendez can call this a witch hunt, but the rest of us? We're just trying to find the man who put gold in his coat and shame on our institution." The clip went viral within the hour. Not because she yelled, not because she insulted, but because she cut through the noise. Late-night shows replayed the moment. Analysts praised her clarity. Former DOJ officials tweeted support. And in town halls across New Jersey, the line showed up on hand-lettered signs. Not a witch hunt, just hunting gold. But not everyone clapped. Within party ranks, a storm was quietly brewing. Some feared the growing media frenzy. Others worried Jasmine had now become too visible, too bold, too uncontrollable. A memo leaked from a Democratic strategy firm warned that the party was one viral clip away from permanent fracture. Jasmine read it, tossed it aside, and went back to her notes. She hadn't come to D.C. to manage image. She came to protect principle. Meanwhile, inside Menendez's private office, the senator replayed Jasmine's clip in silence. He didn't speak. He didn't throw anything. But something in his stare changed. He knew she had hit something deeper than facts. She had cracked the illusion, that armor of political narrative that had protected him for years. He turned to one of his aides and muttered, "We're going to have to shut her down." The aide said nothing, because even he knew it might already be too late. Outside, the tide kept turning. Polls now showed over 72% of voters in New Jersey, Democrats included, wanted Menendez to resign. Editorial boards that once praised him now called for accountability. The DNC, under pressure from state leaders, issued a carefully worded statement urging ethical reflection. But Jasmine, she didn't blink. In a follow-up interview, she doubled down. "I don't care if you wear a red tie or a blue one. If you sell your influence, you've sold out the people who trusted you. And I didn't come here to clap while that happens." The line lit up cable news again. She was no longer just a freshman congresswoman. She had become the moral voice in a moment of national reckoning. And everyone knew it. Inside his townhouse, Menendez poured another drink, sat in the dark, and watched the news replay her words one more time. This time, he didn't reach for the remote. He just listened. And for the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about lawyers or party messaging or holding his seat. He was thinking about how the walls, so carefully built, were now bleeding light. And the woman shining that light? She wasn't going away. She wasn't backing down. And she wasn't afraid. But no amount of spin, deflection, or polished outrage could stop what was coming. Because when the dam finally broke, it wasn't a leak. It was a federal indictment, and the name at the top of the first page was Robert Menendez. The announcement came at 8:31 a.m. Eastern Time. The Justice Department's seal flashed across every major network as U.S. Attorney Lisa Marston stepped to the podium in Manhattan, flanked by agents in dark suits and solemn faces. She spoke clearly, without drama. "Today, the Department of Justice is unsealing a 14-count indictment against Senator Robert Menendez," she said. "Charges include bribery, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit acts against the interests of the United States." Cameras clicked in rapid fire. Reporters scrambled for copies of the court filing. And behind the scenes across the Capitol, a chill swept through the offices of lawmakers who had once called Menendez a colleague, a mentor, a shield. Jasmine sat in her office, watching in silence. Her jaw set, her heart calm. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. Because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the real war. 3 days later, the House Ethics Committee voted unanimously to open an inquiry, and the Senate followed suit within hours. But what shook Washington most was the announcement that followed: the formation of a special congressional hearing, unprecedented in its urgency, to examine the scope of Menendez's influence and the foreign networks he may have compromised. Jasmine Crockett was named the lead civilian witness. Her role was not just symbolic, it was surgical. She wasn't just the woman who'd spoken the truth. She was the one who had documented it, built it, bled for it, and now she was being asked to place it on the national record, under oath. The hearing chamber was overflowing the morning she walked in. Spectators pressed against the walls. Reporters were shoulder to shoulder. Flashbulbs went off like a lightning storm. Menendez sat at the far end of the table, his face harder now, thinner. Power had retreated from him like a tide. He wore a navy suit that hung a little looser than it had a month before. His hands were folded, but his knuckles were white. Jasmine took her seat with quiet resolve. She didn't look at him. Not yet. She waited for the committee chair to speak, waited for the oath to be sworn, and when it was her turn, she leaned into the microphone. Not for drama, but for precision. Her testimony was not angry. It was devastating. She walked through the documents, the wire transfers, the gold bar serial numbers, the shell company addresses, the defense contract dates. She read names, quoted call logs, traced lines that no one had wanted to see. This isn't about one man's greed, she said. It's about the cost of silence. It's about what happens when we convince ourselves that power is too sacred to question. Her voice never cracked. Not once. She answered every question from the panel without notes. She didn't blink when asked about the threats. She didn't falter when they played the secret recording from the hotel meeting where Menendez had called her a problem with a price. She just nodded and said, "Yes, that's exactly how corruption talks. It doesn't scream. It whispers in rooms with velvet walls." Then came the break. Cameras cut. The room emptied into murmuring hallways and frantic headlines. And in that pause, as aides cleared coffee cups and senators checked their phones, Menendez stood and walked the long aisle toward her. No cameras followed. No microphones hovered. Just one final crossing of two people who no longer belonged to the same world. He stopped 2 feet from her and spoke in a low voice, so quiet only she could hear it. "You will never understand," he said, eyes dark and sharp. "The real weight of power. You weren't born to hold it." His lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in a sneer carved by decades of surviving scandal. "You're brave, but naive, and the machine always eats the brave." Jasmine stood slowly, turning to face him fully. Her posture didn't shift. Her stare didn't waver. And when she spoke, her words were soft, but lethal. "I don't need to understand the weight of power. I just need to break it." She stepped past him without another glance, because the difference between them was no longer status or title, it was truth. One was clinging to it like a lifeline. The other had become it. By the time the hearing resumed, the nation had already digested the exchange. An aide in the back had caught the moment on a hot mic, and within hours the quote was everywhere. Menendez's words landed like a confession. Jasmine's reply lit up screens, podcasts, and front pages. "I just need to break it." It wasn't just a soundbite, it was a declaration of war, not against one man, but against the system that allowed him to exist. And that finally was the shift. And when Jasmine walked back into that hearing room, leaving Menendez behind in the silence of his own unraveling, the nation didn't just hear her words. It followed them like a map towards something that had felt lost for years: accountability. The indictment landed like a thunderclap. Just 48 hours after Jasmine's final testimony, the Department of Justice filed its charges formally and publicly. Conspiracy, bribery, abuse of office, obstruction of justice, and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The front page of the filing read, "United States versus Robert Menendez." But what followed was a mirror held up to decades of political rot. Every numbered paragraph told a story: secret meetings, unexplained wire transfers, gold bars traded like currency, and the chilling coordination of foreign influence at the highest levels of domestic power. Menendez issued a defiant statement, his voice growing smaller with each press release. But the country had already turned the page. The spell was broken. The suit no longer fit. The office no longer shielded. Inside the Capitol, something else shifted. Jasmine, once seen as the outsider, the upstart, the disruptor, now stood at the center of the reform movement that followed the scandal's wake. In less than 3 weeks, she introduced the Public Trust Integrity Act, a sweeping piece of legislation requiring full disclosure of foreign-linked assets, mandatory audit trails for all federal lawmakers, and criminal penalties for any elected official caught concealing assets valued over $10,000, including gold and precious commodities. The bill faced resistance at first, as all real reform does. Lobbyists panicked. Some colleagues squirmed, but the public roared. Call lines to Congress lit up. Newspapers across the political spectrum endorsed it. Voters demanded it, and in a historic 89-11 vote, the act passed both chambers. Jasmine didn't celebrate on the floor. She stood, accepted the gavel tap, and returned to her seat quietly. The victory wasn't hers. It belonged to everyone who had once believed the system would never hold its own accountable. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's name was floated on every network and editorial board as the natural choice for a U.S. Senate run. Donations poured in before she even opened a campaign account. Governors called. Former presidents reached out. Even global media outlets began referring to her as the conscience of Capitol Hill. But when asked by reporters about her political future, she gave the same answer every time, with no speech, no spin. Just one sentence. I don't need to climb higher. I just need to clean where I stand. That single line, clear and unpolished, rippled farther than any announcement could have. It wasn't humility. It was rebellion against the very machine she just exposed. In a city obsessed with upward movement, Jasmine had planted her flag in place and said, "Here is where I make my stand." She refused television deals, declined memoir offers, and when asked by a network anchor if she feared being left behind while others advanced, she simply smiled and replied, "I didn't come here to rise. I came here to pull the rot out by the roots." The anchor blinked, the feed cut, but the message had landed like a fist on the table. In New Jersey, where the scandal had cut deepest, something extraordinary unfolded. On the steps of the same courthouse where the indictment had been read, hundreds of citizens gathered. They came with cardboard cutouts of gold bars, wrapped in glitter and fake serial numbers. School teachers, steel workers, nurses, college students, grandmothers. They built a pile of those fake bars in the center of the plaza and set them ablaze under the supervision of fire marshals. The flames crackled in the cold air, smoke curling into a sky that finally felt a little less heavy. Children held signs hand-drawn in crayon. One read, "No more golden lies." Another, scrawled in bold black ink, read simply, "Justice wears no gold." And for once, it didn't feel like a protest. It felt like a cleansing. Jasmine wasn't there that night. She was in her office, long past sunset, reviewing draft language for the next ethics oversight bill. But someone sent her a photo from the vigil. In it, the flames lit up a circle of faces. Black, brown, white, young, old, all staring forward, not in anger, but in quiet, resolute belief. She stared at that photo for a long time. Then she taped it beside her desk, just above the switch she turned off before locking up for the night. Not because the fight was over, but because, for the first time in a long time, it was working. He didn't wear a protest shirt. He didn't carry a handmade sign. He didn't chant, didn't sing, didn't wave a flag. Marcus Devlin just stood there, hands buried in the worn pockets of his oil-stained jacket, a wool cap pulled down over silver-streaked hair, and a face that looked like it had seen too much to be easily moved. The plaza outside the federal courthouse in Newark was alive, buzzing with cameras, voices, rising chants, and glowing smartphones. But for Marcus, it all sounded distant. The only thing he truly heard was the fire. At the center of the crowd, a pile of cardboard gold bars burned. Some had fake serial numbers written in red Sharpie. Others were wrapped in aluminum foil or spray-painted gold, stacked high like a bonfire built from lies. The flames crackled, casting shadows across faces of all colors, all ages. It wasn't violent. It wasn't chaotic. It was solemn, cleansing, as if the fire was eating more than cardboard. It was consuming something older, heavier, something that had been weighing on this city, this country for far too long. Marcus exhaled slowly, smoke from his breath curling into the night air. He'd seen protests before, marches, outrage. He'd lived through Vietnam, Watergate, the Iraq War, the housing crash. He'd stood on picket lines for union wages in the 80s, watched friends get laid off in the 90s, and buried his younger brother after a preventable opioid overdose just 5 years ago. Washington had made a lot of promises. It had broken more, and he'd learned, slowly and bitterly, that hope was a luxury people like him couldn't afford to keep restocking. But tonight was different. He'd come alone. No one invited him. He wasn't part of any activist group. He wasn't even sure what made him drive the 41 minutes from Elizabeth in the first place. He'd seen the headlines like everyone else. Senator Menendez indicted, gold bars, bribes, Jasmine Crockett standing on the House floor, reading serial numbers like a damn prosecutor. A woman he didn't know, from a state he'd never been to, speaking like someone who wasn't trying to win anything, just trying to clean something. Maybe that was what pulled him here, the need to see if any of it was real. To his left, a teenager was live streaming the flames. "We're out here because justice doesn't wear gold, it wears truth," she said into the camera. Her voice was clear, fierce, proud. To his right, an older black woman hummed low under her breath, holding the hand of a young boy wearing a hoodie that read, "Truth has a memory." Marcus watched them, feeling something stirred deep in his chest, a tightness he hadn't named in years. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was something worse. The fragile, flickering sensation that maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. Then came the moment that would later be replayed on every news outlet across the country. A child, couldn't have been more than 7, stepped forward with a gold-painted block of wood in his hands. He looked up at the organizers standing by the fire, and they nodded gently. The boy walked forward, solemn as a soldier, and placed his fake gold bar on the pile. Before it caught flame, he looked up and said, clear as day, "This isn't ours." It never was. The crowd fell into a hush. Not staged, not planned, just one of those moments that cracked time in half. Marcus blinked, suddenly aware that his fists were clenched inside his jacket pockets. His jaw tight, his heart pounding harder than it should have for a man his age. But he wasn't angry. No. What he felt was the weight of a lifetime, of working until his knees gave out, of being ignored, of being lied to. And for the first time in a long time, that weight didn't feel permanent. A local reporter, young, hopeful, probably new, spotted him standing apart from the crowd and walked over, recorder in hand. "Sir, would you mind if I ask, what brought you here tonight?" she asked, polite but urgent, like every answer might matter. Marcus looked at her, not with irritation, not with amusement, just quiet certainty. "I wanted to see with my own damn eyes," he said. "See what?" she asked. "That someone up there still gives a damn," he replied, nodding toward the Capitol lights on the horizon. "She didn't just talk. She did. That's rare." The reporter paused, sensing the gravity in his voice. Then she asked the question every network had been floating for days. "Do you think Jasmine Crockett should run for Senate?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked back at the fire, at the boy, at the crowd. Then he shook his head. "I don't need her in a bigger seat," he said, calm but firm. "I just need more rooms to have her spirit in it." That clip would travel faster than he expected. Within 24 hours, it had racked up over 4 million views online. People shared it not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. A man with no stake in the game, no political ambition, no platform, just truth, worn like a second skin. Later that night, long after the fire had died and the crowd had thinned, Marcus walked back to his truck alone. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't post a photo, didn't care if anyone had seen him there. But as he turned the key in the ignition, he stared for a moment at the windshield, at the faint reflection of his own face, and for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he had witnessed something. Not the fall of a senator, not a scandal, but a shift. And that was enough to get him to show up again. Maybe not to chant, maybe not to march, but to stand. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing any citizen can do. The House chamber was silent, not the procedural silence of waiting on a vote, not the stiff quiet of bureaucratic fatigue, but the kind of silence that comes when a room realizes it's about to witness something final, something human, something historic. The speaker had yielded the floor, cameras were rolling, members leaned forward in their seats. Staffers along the back wall stood still, hands clasped, eyes locked ahead. Even the press gallery, so often distracted, was frozen, pens lowered, screens forgotten, and at the center of it all stood Representative Jasmine Crockett. She wore no bright colors, no attention-grabbing brooch, no statement necklace, just a dark navy suit, her congressional pin over her heart, and a quiet, unshakable stillness. Her hands rested on the edge of the podium, not gripping it, but grounding herself. She took a breath, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just a breath that said, "This matters." Then she spoke. Mr. Speaker, members of Congress, and to the people who trusted me with this seat, this will be my final address as a member of this body. There was no gasp, no murmuring. Everyone already knew, but hearing it spoken made it real, made it final. I stand here not because I've run out of fight, she continued, voice steady, rich with controlled power. I stand here because I have proven the fight is not foolish. She paused, letting the words settle, not to savor them, but to respect them. Because this wasn't just her story. It belonged to everyone who had stood beside her. Everyone who'd believed her when it was dangerous to. You all know what happened. A man who wore power like armor used it like a weapon. He sold it, repackaged it, and wrapped it in flags to make it smell like patriotism. But it was greed, and it always had been. She didn't raise her voice, but the truth in her tone hit like a gavel dropped in judgment. When I named it, when I laid out the wires, the gold, the names, some said I was making enemies, that I'd pay for it, that I'd lose everything. She turned slightly, eyes sweeping across the chamber. Not accusing, just acknowledging. But I didn't come here to make friends. I didn't come here to be palatable. I came here because I believe public service should mean something. A few nods, a few eyes lowered, a few hands gripping pens tighter. So no, I won't run for Senate, she said, firm and unflinching. Because we don't fix broken ceilings by climbing through them. We fix broken houses by staying in the room where the floor is rotting and pulling up every board. The line landed like a stone dropped into still water. It wasn't ambition, it was intention. And yes, she said, eyes shining, not with tears but with conviction. It hurt. It cost me. I've been smeared, threatened, mocked. I've walked into this chamber knowing people were waiting for me to slip. Her hands tightened slightly on the podium. But I also walked into this chamber knowing that truth was heavier than lies, and that courage, even when quiet, is stronger than any whisper of corruption. A pause, a breath, then came the heart of it. There is a lie we tell ourselves in this place, she said, her voice low now, that the longer you stay, the more you know. That with tenure comes wisdom, but sometimes tenure just calcifies cowardice, and wisdom comes not from time served, but from truce faced. Somewhere near the back, someone exhaled sharply, caught between admiration and discomfort. I leave this office not because I am done, but because I believe the people have finally started to listen. Because I believe the fire we lit in this chamber will spread, not as destruction, but as purification. A flicker of something passed across her face then. Not triumph, not pride, something softer, hope. To the young woman watching this with her hands shaking, wondering if she's allowed to call out power, yes, you are. To the man who's been told he's too small to matter, no, you are not. You are the cornerstone of this republic. And to every person who has ever said, what I do won't make a difference, I am standing here to tell you, I did what I could, and it did. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. We are stewards of a nation, not keepers of thrones. And if we forget that, if we defend the robes of office more fiercely than we defend the souls of our people, then we have become loyal to the wrong thing. Another pause. Jasmine's voice quiet now, almost like prayer. I don't leave because I've lost faith. I leave because I've found it. In people, in pressure, in proof that even stone walls can crack when you speak with truth, again and again, without blinking. She stepped back from the mic. Just an inch. I came here with no promises, and I leave with no regrets. And with that, she turned, walked down from the dais and out of the chamber, not to applause, not to cheering, but to a silence thick with something rare in Washington. Respect. In the press gallery, a few reporters lowered their pens, unsure how to follow it. In the chamber, members stood slowly, instinctively, some with hands over hearts, others with heads bowed, not in mourning, but in reckoning. And outside, in cities far from the marble floors of Washington, televisions echoed with one line more than any other. We don't fix broken ceilings by climbing through them. We fix broken houses by staying in the room where the floor is rotting and pulling up every board. It wasn't just a farewell, it was a blueprint. As Jasmine disappeared into the marble corridors for the last time, leaving behind applause, tension, and history itself, the weight of her words remained, not as a closing act, but as a question pressed into the conscience of a nation. What do we do with power once we finally see it for what it is? The lesson wasn't written in legislation or carved into courtroom walls. It lived in the eyes of those who watched her fight, those who understood, often for the first time, that truth and power rarely live in the same place. Jasmine's journey wasn't just a takedown of a corrupt senator. It was a confrontation with a machine designed to outlast honesty. She had walked into a system wrapped in tradition and reinforced by silence, knowing full well it could swallow her whole. And yet, she spoke, again and again, not because she was fearless, but because she refused to let fear write the ending. The injustice she faced wasn't just political, it was structural, cultural, inherited, and her resistance was a rebellion not of volume, but of clarity. In a town where everyone talks, she chose to speak only when it mattered, and when she did, the country listened. What Jasmine taught us is that justice isn't a job title. It's not a robe or a gavel or a chair in a hearing room. It's a decision, a deliberate, relentless decision to see what others ignore and call it by its name. She showed us that conscience isn't weakness and restraint is not surrender, that it takes more strength to hold your line than to chase applause. She stood against a storm of institutional inertia, personal attacks, and veiled threats, not because she wanted to be a hero, but because someone had to be the fuse. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the world doesn't need a savior in a suit. Sometimes it just needs one person to refuse to blink, to say no when it's easier to nod, to stand still while the room tries to spin. Because in the end, justice is not built by those who reach higher. It's built by those who dig deeper. But as the echoes of Jasmine's final words faded into the chamber's stillness, what remained wasn't just a political victory, it was a moral reckoning that demanded something deeper from every one of us. The human lesson in Jasmine's story isn't about glory or headlines. It's about the quiet cost of integrity. She stood in rooms where deals were struck behind closed doors, where truth was a liability and silence was currency, and she refused to barter her soul. The injustice she faced wasn't a single villain. It was a system that rewards those who look away, that punishes those who point. She was mocked, threatened, isolated, but never undone, because she understood something too many forget. Real courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to bow to it. Jasmine taught us that you don't need to be powerful to confront power. You just need to be unshakably clear about who you are and what you will not let stand. In a world that begs us to compromise, she reminded us that sometimes the most radical act is to simply tell the truth and stay standing when it costs everything. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.